On June 1st, 1986, Canada did something it had never done before. It played in a World Cup game. Have you ever wondered how Canada got that far? I mean, it's pretty unexpected, especially when you realize that the North American Soccer League had folded just 2 years before. Well, we're going to go back into our Canadian time machine and we'll take a look and see if we can figure out what happened. Well, Canada was in the running to qualify for the 1970 World Cup, and it finished just behind the United States. A scoreless draw in Bermuda severely harmed Canada's hopes, and then a loss to the United States in front of a mostly empty stadium in Atlanta sealed Canada's fate. Canada had the misfortune of being grouped with Mexico in the 1974 qualifying process and only managed to win a single game, beating the hapless United States. Well, it wasn't long after that failed qualification attempt that Canadian teams started to pop up in the North American Soccer League. That started in 1975. Now, this, I think, is an important key to understand China's rise to regional prominence in 1986. So, unlike the happy-spending American sides in the NASL, the Canadian teams put an emphasis on developing local, i.e. Canadian talent, and in the end, that emphasis really paid off. In qualifying for the 1978 World Cup, Canada and the United States played an extra match against each other in Haiti, of all places. This would determine who would go on to the CONCACAF Championship. Canada crushed the United States 3-0, taking advantage of an early red card to American Steve Petcher. Though Canada didn't come close to qualifying in the end, it proved that it was no pushover, and it seemed to be a country that had momentum. Now, by the time that qualification started for the 1982 World Cup, the North American Soccer League was in full gear. You would think that the United States would have had its stuff together by this point, right? Well, you'd be wrong. Canada beat the United States once and managed to draw with Mexico twice to finish top of the so-called North American zone. That included a 1-1 draw in Mexico City in front of 90,000 fans. This was one of the greatest moments in Canadian Association football history up to that time. In the end, both Honduras and El Salvador managed to qualify for the 1982 World Cup thanks to this scoreless draw in Honduras in November 1981. Though Canada finished fourth, it did manage to beat El Salvador 1-0. This was another sign that the nation was gaining momentum. And of course, that brings us to the 1986 World Cup. But before we get there, we really have to talk about the ridiculousness that was going on in the NASL at the time. In 1982, NASL CEO Howard J. Samuels had the brilliant idea to create an expansion team in Washington, D.C. that would represent the U.S. national team. This was Team America. Apparently, Samuels thought that outfitting an all-American team in hideous uniforms would prevent the NASL from going completely bankrupt. Of course, he was wrong. So one problem that Team America had was that many American national team players didn't want to break their contracts with their normal professional teams to go play for Team America. Part of the reason why is because they were offering less money. Some of those players were already in the NASL, of course, and that really makes you wonder what the point was of having Team America. Anyway, for a taste of what's going on, check out this July 6, 1983 interview with Jeff Dorgan, who was captain of Team America.
The 1986 World Cup.
You know, people argue, say this can never be the national team because Rick Davis apparently has come out and said this can't be the national team. I'm not there. Well, Rick, you were invited. Why aren't you there? I don't know why you're not there. I think it's the national.
Do you want to know why he's not there?
I would love to know why he's not there.
His explanation is that his development of a soccer player would be further enhanced by staying with the Cosmos. I think that sums up his feeling.
Well, that's fine. I would like to see what that's going to do for the development of the game in this country.
Yeah, it turns out that patriotic pride is a pretty poor incentive. As grainy as this footage is, you can clearly see just how bad Team America was.
To Segura, who brings it past, beats his man, gives it back to Wegley. And then who crosses it with his left foot. Kidd comes in, dive heads it past
Team America wound up finishing dead last in the 1983 NASL. They were one of only 4 teams who were unable to qualify for the playoffs. And seriously, if you weren't able to qualify for the playoffs in the NASL in 1983, there really was something wrong with your team. There were 12 NASL teams in 1983, and 8 of them qualified for the playoffs. Well, around the same time that Team USA was born, Molson, the corporate owner of the Montreal Monarch, decided to try a similar experiment. They proposed to turn the Montreal team into Team Canada. Actually, that excerpt from Soccer in a Football World oversimplifies things a bit. The truth is that Molson had competition in the Labatt breweries. Both were fighting for the right to be considered Team Canada. Labatt owned the Vancouver Whitecaps. If you watch that famous 1979 Cosmos Whitecaps playoff game, you'll notice the excellent play of Carl Valentine for Vancouver. Valentine was a Canadian and was arguably the best player on the pitch in that game. It was just one game, of course, but to me, he looks world class. However, despite the fact that Vancouver had a history of signing excellent Canadian players, and despite the concerns of its French-speaking fans, Montreal won the right to turn itself into Team Canada. The plan was to turn the Monarch into the Canadian national team by the 1984 NASL season. Now, they were far from the best team in the NASL, but the Montreal Monarch were extremely popular, as you can see in this clip from a 1981 playoff game. Now, the Monarch weren't necessarily awful in 1983. They made the playoffs, as you can see in this home match against the once mighty New York Cosmos. But the real story here is the crowd, or rather, the lack of a crowd. The press blamed the lack of interest on the Team Canada plan. The fact that this plan required the Monarch to release foreign players caused local ethnic communities to completely lose interest in the team. In short, this was a really stupid business decision. The sharp drop in attendance was obvious and also quite shocking. Unfortunately, I don't have access to any of the French-Canadian newspapers from 1983, but I'm guessing that the reporting there was probably similar to the English-language Montreal Gazette. And honestly, the idea of having a national team competing in a domestic league actually strikes me as really silly. Only 2 months later, the Monarch officially folded and the Team Canada idea was scrapped. The entire NASL then folded less than a year after that. But there was still the little problem of actually qualifying for the 1986 World Cup. And while CONCACAF qualification in those days was a little bit strange. 16 teams played home and away matches to determine which ones would advance to the CONCACAF Championship. In other words, you only needed to beat a single opponent to reach the final round. Canada was supposed to play Jamaica, but Jamaica dropped out. Now, Jamaica dropped out because it failed to pay the entrance fee, which was 465 Canadian dollars. This was in March 1984, only months away from the collapse of the NASL. Over a year later, on April 13, 1985, Canada finally played a match. It hosted Haiti in its first qualifying group match. By this time, 1985, the only real professional association football in all of North America was the Indoor Soccer League. That league, of course, played by different rules and had a completely different flow than the beautiful game. That didn't deter Canada, however. Canada beat Haiti 2-0 to start its qualification journey. In fact, Canada was quite impressive in group play. It went undefeated against Haiti and Guatemala and advanced to the final group. The United States, meanwhile, lost to Costa Rica in the final match to end its World Cup qualification run.
Dangerous position. Chavez over the ball. Lifted up. Mauser. Mills heads it. Hit it in! Well, we want to take it. She's had the better of territorial play.
You would take it as the ball comes over. It's one of these high crosses that I've been deploring. Mauser does not get to the ball properly. The shot comes in, and now that player there, is he offside because the goalkeeper is out of his goal?
Now, when I do this research and watch these matches, the thing that really amazes me is how much a single goal or a single mistake can completely ruin everything for a country. Just making it to the World Cup is actually really impressive, and sometimes we forget that. In the final group, Canada came from behind to draw Costa Rica in its home leg and fought to a scoreless draw with them in the away leg. This miracle shot beat Honduras on the road.
Now a chance for Canada. Randy Reagan chipping it in. First time left foot shot and it's in! Beautiful opportunity seized, just as we were wondering.
And that set us up for the match that we're going to look at today. So we're going to go back to September 14th, 1985 for what was easily the biggest match in the history of Canadian soccer. All Canada needed to do to advance to the World Cup was tie. The crazy thing in retrospect is that this match was played in St. John's, Newfoundland at ancient King George V Park and not in a bigger stadium. As you can see from this picture, the park wasn't exactly huge. Estimates vary, but it seems that it could officially seat about 7,500 people. I was curious about why Canada played at that tiny venue. I did a little bit of research and discovered that Team Canada had played there one time in the past, and that was in 1972. This was a qualification match for the 1974 World Cup, and they played it in front of only 7,600 fans. Remember, of course, that this was 3 years before Pelé joined the NASL and made soccer popular. The thing that really surprises me is that there seems to have been no controversy about the choice of venue. I mean, why didn't they just move this to, say, Olympic Stadium or Exhibition Stadium and play in front of a big crowd, especially if Team Canada had no money? I mean, just look at the park. The national team was playing here. The announcers speculated that the game might have been played in St. John's due to cold weather, but it wasn't cold that afternoon.
This game was being played in St. John's, Newfoundland, to the disadvantage of the Hondurans, because it would be so cold at this time of year.
Well, whatever the reason, the scenery was absolutely beautiful.
Been that cold.
Anyway, in retrospect, the whole thing is really strange, but I mean, what do I know? I'm just an American. Bruce Wilson, a former NASL superstar, was captain of Team Canada, though it's not clear to me that he was playing on any professional team in 1985. Keeper Tino Lettieri, who had been brilliant so far in the tournament, was another NASL veteran who was playing indoor soccer at the time. Veteran George Pecos was 33 years old by 1985 and was happy to finally start collecting international caps. Pecos seems to have been playing in semi-pro leagues at this time. Then there was Randy Ragan, another NASL veteran who was apparently playing indoor soccer at the time. And up front was Igor Vrablic, one of the few Canadian players playing in Europe. Alongside Vrablic was Carl Valentine, who I mentioned before. He was in England playing for West Brom at the time, and I told you he was world class. Interestingly enough, the game was actually Carl Valentine's first international appearance for Canada. That really baffles me considering how athletic and skilled he was. Well, in North America, we love to talk about the great underdog teams, right? Like the 1980 USA Olympic hockey team, the one that beat the Soviets in the Olympics. Canadians generally will fondly remember the 1972 Canada hockey team. That's the one that played in that famous Summit Series and beat the Soviets in 8 games. Though you have to remember, that was a team of professionals. But honestly, I don't think I can think of any other team in the history of North American sports that were quite as outmatched as this 1985-86 Canada team. I mean, these players didn't have like a proper professional football league to play in. And it's not like Honduras was awful. Remember, they did qualify for the World Cup in 1982. Despite the small stadium, this match really had a tense feeling to it. And right from the start, strange things started to happen. However, Canada did show a good counter-attack right from the beginning. Canada did have an argument for a penalty here. Perhaps they had a better argument on this one.
James crossing into the middle for Vrablic. Vrablic is brought down inside the box.
They won this key corner.
Valentine takes that well, leaves it for Vrablic. Vrablic can't get by his men.
And then it came.
Valentine to take it. Swings it in. Bridge gets ahead on it. There's the shot. They score!
Now, Canada was playing a real tight defense, and it worked wonders.
Closely, typical Canadian style is paying off. The Canadians just not allowing the Hondurans to get anything going.
I'm not sure if this was technically a gegenpress, though it looks really close to me.
Now Vrablic coming over in support. Dumont doing a good job to control the...
And Canada kept getting its chances.
Swings it in. Oh, and the keeper was out of position.
Down by a goal and needing a win to move on, Honduras started playing with desperation. That led to one Canadian chance after another.
James chips into the box. Valentine gets ahead on David Norman. Back through the middle. And there was a golden opportunity for fine Vrablic. Reagan losing it. And then Valentine coming up with it. Reagan crossed the box to David Norman. David Norman gets the cross in, but Arzu...
Near the end of the first half, Canada pulled off a few miraculous defensive plays.
Is the outside man. Let's see if he puts it through that opening. Here's the shot. Well struck. A loose ball and cleared by Ian Bridge.
This one was particularly amazing.
He's knocked over. Maradiaga chips the ball forward, looking for Gilberto. Tino Lanier is well out of his net. No!
Honduras clawed back with an equalizer early in the second half. It looked like that Canadian defense started to tire. But then, about 15 minutes later, Canada struck again.
Take the corner kick. Swings it in, near post, headed away, and it's in! It's in!
That prompted the crowd to start singing.
Valentine. Losing it. Scaraway. Into the middle.
Well, now with the 2-1 lead and needing only a draw to move on, you would expect Canada to take its foot off the gas a little bit, but they didn't do anything of the sort. Canada just kept on coming with the pressure.
All alone in front, there's the shot! A bouncing ball, and it's taken. Paul James with a good run down the right side. He's behind the defender. Can he get the shot away? He does! Oh, and it's... This is Brableach. Brableach with a shot! Oh, and he hit the post!
This was really the only chance Honduras had to equalize in the second half.
Tino Lanier does well, comes well out of his box,
and that brought on the final whistle.
And the referee again checking his watch, and there it goes!
Some of these celebration scenes were absolutely iconic.
Along with the Canadian team.
But unfortunately for Canada, the good times did not last. In June 1986, the Canadian newspapers made a huge deal out of the World Cup, devoting pages and pages to coverage. Canada had its chances early in its first match against France.
Here's a chance for Valentine. Can he settle himself, chipping it across?
But Canada couldn't keep France out forever. France finally scored with about 10 minutes to go. Canada had a chance late to tie it, but nothing came of it.
There, directing traffic for the Canadian team as we look at the French keeper bats. There's the shot taken by Segota right into the...
The papers, meanwhile, played it up almost as if Canada had won. But it all fell apart early in Canada's second match against Hungary. This time, the papers were a bit more critical. In fact, the Canadian press made a huge deal out of the fact that the odds makers had predicted that Canada wouldn't score a single goal. Canada didn't last long in its final match against the USSR.
Who's just come on as a sub, comes inside, and finds blocking.
This one hurt worst of all since the Soviets rested most of their regular starters for this match. As predicted, Canada did not score a single goal in its first World Cup appearance. Predictably, that led to a lot of sour grapes in the Canadian press. And, as I bet you already know, that was Canada's last World Cup appearance until 2022. Now, in 2022, the Canadians were able to score 2 goals in the World Cup, so they have that under their belt, but Canada has still yet to secure a single World Cup win. Now, I wonder if Canada would have fared a little bit better in 1986 if most of its players weren't playing indoor soccer. There were also contemporary reports of poor coaching decisions and upset players. This is, though, the sort of thing that naturally comes when you don't score a single goal in the World Cup. But in the end, I guess we can only speculate as to how this impressive-looking Canadian team might have done with a little bit more luck.